I've read there are over 1,600 temples and 400 Shinto shrines in Kyoto. This plethora of choices made armchair traveling very interesting and fun entertainment, but also demanding. How do I choose? One of the easiest searches was finding private estate gardens open to the public in Kyoto. I know of 4 of them, but I decided to visit just one. I chose Okochi Sanso Villa because it is a relatively young garden compared to its ancient neighbors. It's known for its attention to detail and outstanding beauty in all 4 seasons. Cherry trees with their pink and white blossoms in spring, the open-faced flowers of the azaleas in summer, the brilliant fire red and contrasting golds of maple trees in the fall, and finally, carefully clipped and pruned pine trees in the winter. Also, the reviews were excellent. Okochi Denjiro is the man on the far left, pictured here with his producers. Okochi was a Japanese silent film star of the 30s. He was born in 1898, and his given name was Masuo Obe. His father was a 16th generation physician, and his mother was the daughter of a samurai and Confucian scholar. Masuo grew up in a time of modernization in Japan, just after the end of the Edo period, 1603 through 1867, and the beginning of the Meiji period, 1868 through 1912. Societal changes of the time said he did not have to follow in his father's footsteps and become a physician. Instead, Masuo chose to enter the new and exciting world of silent film, and he became Okochi Denjiro. I can only imagine the family dinners as he tried to persuade his parents that he would rather not be a doctor, but instead wanted to become a movie star. It probably helped that he was the 5th son in a family of 9 children. This is a woodblock print of Okochi Denjiro playing the role of Tange Seizen, a one-armed, one-eyed forgotten samurai. Okochi played outlaw heroes who were experts with a samurai sword. He was very much the Asian counterpart to our Zorro. The original woodblock was done by the artist Sensen Natori. Here he is leaning up against his Toyota. Toyota became Toyoto when it incorporated November 3, 1937. Only 1,404 Toyota Model AAs were built from 1936 to 1942. It was a reverse-engineered car copied from the U.S.-built 1934 Chrysler DeSoto. You can tell from the photo it is not a U.S.-built automobile. The 34 Chrysler was designed with a split front windshield. Okochi's car's windshield is all of one piece. I wonder if the number on his vehicle reflects the car's number as it came off the assembly line. Here he is, looking very Elvis. I wonder if he wore a ducktail in the back. I know my brother combined his 50s pompadour with a ducktail, and he was a very cool kid. Okochi looks to be deep in thought, and I chose to believe he was working on future garden plans when this photograph was taken. Okochi built his villa slowly. He found this property early in his acting career. From the photo, you can see his home was quite large. When designing his home, he combined 2 types of Japanese architecture not often seen together. The Shinden Zukuri style, a more formal, austere style used in large estate homes, and the Tsukiya Zukuri style, a more natural, simpler type of architecture. Tsukiya Living magazine still promotes and uses the Tsukiya design principles originating in 1587 that Okochi used in his garden. This style requires a close relationship between the owner, the builder, and the architect. I wonder who he chose to help him. Walking up to the garden, the pathway is lined with Japanese sugi pine trees, ferns, azaleas, and moss. The walkway leads to an open area that has a huge tree whose branches are held up with wooden post scaffolding. The posts look so straight I thought they were made of metal, but they were not. They're made of wood. The propping of trees is a common sight in Japan, but it is usually used to protect them from heavy snow loads. But it doesn't snow very much in Kyoto, so I was curious. I learned that if a tree is braced, the larger branches no longer need all of the energy used to hold them up and force the excess energy into newer, smaller branches. Bracing the large limbs stretches and enlarges the smaller limbs, developing a wider canopy and helping preserve older and valuable trees. The Okochi Sanso garden is called a natural style, or a Zoki no Niwa garden. It is a hill garden that uses native mountain trees and foliage together with cultivated maple trees. From the bottom of the path, the mountain hills provide borrowed scenery. The borrowed scenery was then interplanted with a variety of red and golden Japanese maple trees. The trees he chose are in full color in mid-November, while the native mountain foliage of the hills will not turn for weeks. He combined the natural forest with a controlled planting, extending the fall season and providing color lasting well into the winter. This gate separates the outside garden from the inside garden. It welcomes you to leave the past behind and to go forward into another world. In this Wikipedia photo, the placement of objects around the gate is asymmetrical, creating interesting negative space, a nod to nature's imperfections. The rough-hewn posts of the unpainted wooden gate are an example of the Japanese reverence for all things simple and all things old. The passage and weight of time are felt in the granite Ishidoro lantern and the beautiful Buddha stone. These are important Japanese design elements. Placement of objects is asymmetrical. They use natural and simple building materials. The passage of time and its ephemeral nature is a very important concept. Understanding garden design from a Japanese perspective is like looking through a door into their culture. Okochi used this beautiful stone to begin his path up the mountain. I wonder what kind of stone it is, where he found it, and what meaning it had for him. The steps up to the gate were a comfortable width for one person and informal in style. Informal style garden paths are called gyo. Notice the large greeting stone in front of the threshold. Guests would be greeted by Okochi from the other side. The steps going up are wide enough for two, allowing for side-by-side conversation. As the path continued, it narrowed, changing the focus to oneself. I mostly contemplated my feet, as some of the stones were quite high. The reasoning behind raised stones is that they keep your feet dry, even in the rain. I found these stones difficult to navigate, but I walked on old feet. Others seemed to enjoy the challenge. Here is a converging path that uses a millstone and small cobbles before once more heading upward. The simplest paths were made of pea gravel with moss at the edges. The gravel depth was not too thick and not too thin. It was very well done. This is the least formal style of design, called so in Japanese. I love this kind of path as it lets me enjoy the plants without worry. Here is an example of a simple cobblestone path that stops and becomes a bit more formal. It is still gyo, or informal in design. The stones are set on their sides, with horizontal pieces placed close together, broken up with larger round stones in a typical asymmetrical design. The Okochi Garden main pathway leads people in one direction, a one-way path, difficult if not impossible to retrace. I laughed when reading these two signs, one leading me forward and the other instructing me to look over there before proceeding. The sign wants the visitor to continue in the correct direction, but also wants you to look back the other way before proceeding. It was beginning to get crowded on the path, and I could see the wisdom of directing traffic in one direction. But I could also very much appreciate the heads up as to the beauty I would miss if I decided to continue forward. I decided to look over there. In front of me was a graveled road leading to the villa. A lawn of yellow moss was on the left, with tiers of pruned pines and small maples extending outward to the mountains. A welcoming lantern was on the left, and then the villa. Continuing around, you see a yellow ginkgo tree, a tree prized for its longevity, and then back around to the yellow moss lawn. I'd never seen yellow moss, and it challenged my moss conceptions. Moss is supposed to be green, not yellow. But this moss is growing in full sun. It's not dying, and it looks very healthy. For this area, it works beautifully. An excellent example of using the right plant in the right place. Roof shapes define much of Japanese architecture. Okochi uses the hip and gable style we all recognize as being typically Asian at the front, and he uses a hipped roof without a gable for the building further back. The roofs seem to be made of wooden shingles, but I could not get close enough to see for sure. Notice how far the roof and gables come out from the buildings. They protect the structure very much like a porch. A wooden floor extends out from the house, called the engawa. Finally, sliding doors used to enter the buildings bring the outdoors into the indoors. Japanese architecture shows their reverence of nature, and also their seeing themselves as a part of it. As this fellow traveler did, I sat for a time in wonder of this amazing garden accomplishment one last time before moving forward on the one-way path. I noticed the repetition of the azaleas and cherry trees planted along the path and imagined how different the path would look in spring and summer. A beautiful stone slab made an impressive bench, and I sat for just a moment. Repetition of plants is a hallmark of good garden design. Patterns of color and shape reassure and ease the mind, to say nothing of how it simplifies garden maintenance. This simplified pillar was set into the ground, and it seemed to be made up of parts of other pillars. It doesn't have a fire or light box piece, and the granite surfaces do not match. Maybe parts of it are hundreds of years old. It is beautiful and nicely placed near the pathway. This pagoda, also set into the ground and nicely cocooned among the azalea shrubs, has 5 levels. Each level represents the 5 basic elements of the universe: earth, water, fire, wind, and space. The 5 tiers draw the eye up past the now leafless cherry trees to the colorful maples behind. A beautiful vignette. Sunken stones and huge rock slabs make the trail easier to navigate. Mountain vistas begin to peek through. This view looks down upon his villa, where Okochi planted cherry trees that would grow taller than the azaleas in the foreground. When the cherry trees bloom, the mountains look as though they are floating on clouds of white blossoms. I paused at this Ishidoro lantern, placed to light the way to the tea garden. The granite foot is covered with moss. The moss has been scraped off where it is trying to overcome the lichen. The moss is kept at a level of beauty, not too much, not too little. The scraping makes the Buddha sculpture become clear, just in time for autumn. The scraping also reveals the imperial symbol of Japan, the chrysanthemum. A few leaves are left on the ground, and some swept to the back as mulch. A fallen branch to the left, and a broken stone to the right. Over the hill and just below it, the view opened to a Meiji-era temple set in a dry landscape garden. The villa's entire history originated at this spot. Okochi often came to visit here and found inspiration through meditation and prayers. Okochi had gone through the devastating Tokyo earthquake of 1923. His choice of location was probably influenced by this tragedy. The path continues upward. The higher it goes, the smaller the path becomes, and you are led stone by stone, just one ahead of the other, to a clearing of yellow moss and what looks like a new planting of pines below the towering maples. The lantern is beautifully placed among the azaleas. The stones become even higher and closer together. There is no room for error walking on the stone. But then relief. A wide stone path leads to another glorious view of the natural mountains. Could that possibly be Camellia sinensis? Tea plants in the foreground? In the distance, when the cloud lifts, Daiheikaku Senkoji Temple comes into view with colorful flying flags in front of a yellow ginkgo tree. Just a few miles as the crow flies from this side of the mountain, but reachable by a trail along the Oi River just below. Here you see the city of Kyoto nestled in the middle of the surrounding mountains. Kyoto is 180 feet above sea level, with the highest peak behind it just under 3,000 feet. Looking at it from this vantage point, the city reminds me very much of Santa Fe, it too nestled among its mountain ranges. They share the same clear, beautiful blue skies. Walking further on is the Moon Viewing Pavilion, which gives another expansive view of Kyoto and the surrounding mountains. The moon over Kyoto and its city lights must be a wonderful sight in the evening. And then came the pathway down, in some ways more difficult than the walk up. The garden was becoming very crowded by this time, and I stopped every now and then to let people pass. At one point, I stopped behind the mother and daughter shown in this photo to let others pass. The daughter was shielding her mom, and I decided to take refuge behind them. As I passed them, soon after came a man dressed in a beautiful suit who offered me his arm, and he led me down the rest of the path. Wow, that made me feel old, but on reflection I see it as one of the many kindnesses I was shown during my visit to Japan. Okochi's garden reflects Japanese history, Japanese culture, and its dedication to art and beauty. I am so glad I came here. My world is enriched 1,000 times. If he were alive, and I could say thank you, I would give him a most reverent and respectful bow.